On December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier aviation attacked U.S. bases in Pearl Harbor. Several hours later, on December 8 local time, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. On the very first day, bomb attacks destroyed most of the aircraft stationed on the island. The bombings continued for several days. On December 11, the Japanese attempted to land on the island. Some of the 4th Fleet ships headed towards Wake Island. The 4 remaining VMF-211 airplanes received an order to attack enemy ships.
What's going on, guys? It's Brandon again, and today I've got a new War Thunder video for you guys today. This is going to be the Wake Island mission from the historical campaign of War Thunder, and I decided to do another one since you guys enjoyed the other one so much, so let me go ahead and jump right into this. But Wake Island, this is the battle that proved the myth of the Japanese invincibility could be shattered. This was the first battle after Pearl Harbor that showed the force of the American might, basically. The Marines were easy prey, as regarded by Tokyo, and even Washington said that they were basically going to get ran over. Now, they were outmanned and they were outgunned, but they held their ground and won an important battle for the U.S. Even though it ended in their surrender, they still won this battle, basically. But what made Wake Island so desirable? Now, Wake Island was a main tourist attraction, and Pan Am ended up setting up an airport here, a runway. So the fact that runways could be installed here was a major advancement, basically, for any side who controlled it. So Wake Island was I believe it was 400 to 600 miles off the coast of Japan. So knowing Japan and how America started progressively expanding their Pacific outreach for where they had military installations, Japan noticed that Wake Island could be used as a possible military zone, which it ended up being used for that. Now, on December 8th, Wake Island received word that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, so the island was under immediate warning to get ready. 4 Wildcats were dispatched from the airfield to zoom around and basically look for any enemy incoming fighters, bombers, ships that they could spot. But the weather condition was very poor, and the 4 Wildcats ended up missing a group of Japanese bombers that started relentlessly bombing the island for days, basically. And it was basically hard to fend them off. Now, the Japanese decided to change their tactics to a ground invasion on December 11th. 15 warships appeared on the horizon and started dispatching troops. Now, the day before this, the Japanese easily took Guam over and decided to limit their force for the advancement on Wake Island. But this is where the Japanese really screwed up, because these Marines on the island were well trained, and there was also 1,100 civilians on the island, which also helped their Marines fend off the attack. And so the Japanese were very underarmed for this type of battle, it seemed. And this was also because they were spread wide across this Pacific, going for different islands. And they expected a easy victory, basically. Now, to top it off, the Japanese didn't even call in air support on the ground attack. So this was another very big issue also. The earlier aviation pilots that came in there and bombed the shit out of it assumed that all of the major ground defenses were basically decimated. Now, along with brilliance and luck, Major Devereaux told his men to hold fire of the artillery guns to lure the warships into range, basically. And basically the warships ended up falling for it, and when the warships got within 4,500 yards, the order was given to let loose and basically just unload on these guys. Now, this is when the Japs realized, oh shit, we are getting pounded. So they ended up turning around, and during this, the destroyer Hayate, I think that's how you pronounce it, was decimated. Now, once this happened, once the Hayate was decimated, they ended up turning around and retreating. This is where our mission in this game ends up picking up right here. And basically we're going in for the bombers now that end up coming back. And basically the 4 Wildcats end up going out, and they ended up chasing down the warships. And someone regarded that sinking a destroyer with a 100-pound bomb was impossible. Well, Captain Henry Elrod said that if it's impossible, then it's just going to take a little longer. And Captain Elrod ended up dive-bombing destroyer and dropped his 100-pound bomb, which actually landed right in the depth charge area of the ship that had depth charges on it, and ended up detonating the depth charges and totally blowing up the ship. And this was the Kissaroga that he destroyed. I believe that's how you pronounce it. But after the retreat, America named Wake Island as the Alamo of the Pacific. And this victory, however, was short-lived, as Japanese bombers ended up continually bombing the island once again. Is what you're seeing right here after we bombed the shit out of that ship. But Wake Island then turned into a rescue mission for the Allies. From Pearl Harbor, they sent the Lexington and the Saratoga to go out in a rescue mission, basically. And on the Saratoga, they sent men, planes, and much-needed supplies, while the Lexington diverted Marshall Islands to draw attention away. Now, it's basically a race to see who can get to Wake Island first. However, the Japanese ended up getting to Wake Island first, beating the Americans in the race. Now, since the Japanese ended up arriving there first, the Marines were just basically setting their own future. Their fate was sealed. They had nowhere else to go. The Americans would not go for them at that point because they deemed them as too big of a risk, too big of an expense to risk all these men. And I'm kind of curious what would have happened if the Americans would have actually all come in and helped them out, since they totally ended up pushing back the Japanese, but we'll get to that part in a second. Now, the Americans were down to their final 2 planes, and one of them ended up getting shot down, so all that was left was Herbert Foiler. Now, the shining moment for this final air battle was when the airplane who sunk the USS Arizona was shot down by Herbert Foiler. And he ended up getting shot in the shoulder during this, ended up landing, and that deemed the Americans to lose all of their final planes. Now, the fight was taken to the ground finally. The Japanese forces started to invade. The Marines and civilian forces started shelling and going basically to close quarters combat with the Japs. And Captain Elrod, the fearless pilot, who ended up blowing up the ship with the destroyer with a 100-pound bomb, and ended up killing several other pilots, or shooting down other pilots in the air, ended up picking up a Thompson, heading straight into the enemy fire, and say, "Come on, boys, we gotta kill these sons of bitches." And he shot a whole bunch of Japanese. He threw his Thompson to his comrade, but his fellow soldier next to him. He picked up a heavy LMG that he got from a soldier that he shot an enemy Japanese soldier, and he just started spraying the hell out of the other Japanese. And during this, while he was trying to throw a grenade into them, he ended up getting shot and was killed instantly. And this ended up being the first man who received the Medal of Honor during the Pacific conflict, and it might have been the war for that matter for the Americans. But it was a really brave man, but ended up being shot. Now, during the morning, Commander Deborah and Commander Cunningham ended up seeing a whole bunch of Japanese flags all over the island. And by this point, they pretty much knew that their fates were sealed. But in reality, they couldn't get a hold of the other troops that were pushing back soldiers. And and really the soldiers ended up pushing the Japanese all the way back in the ocean. However, they did not know this, and it came down to Commander Cunningham ended up signaling a surrender to the Japanese, since basically they were low on men, and his men ended up being pretty angry at him because he always gave them the turn that Marines never surrender. And he ended up surrendering his troops, and they were all pretty upset about that. So I mean, I can understand them. You're giving them hell. You push them all the way back in the ocean just to have them all give up all your troops. Now, after the surrender, they ended up marching around the island, waving a white flag, and for all the troops to drop their guns and to come out. And basically, all the men were gathered on the runway after a few days of just them having to sit out in the elements. The Japanese weren't treating them very well, but when they were gathered on the airstrip, the men were all stripped down. They were tied with telephone wire that was on the island, which was part of the reason why the commander couldn't get a hold of his troops. And the execution was about to happen. All the men, all the civilians were on the runway. And right before the execution was going to happen, Admiral Koshi, I don't know how to pronounce it, I think it's Kashioko, came to the runway. He's the commander of the Japanese Pacific Fleet that was trying to take that area right there, Wake Island. And he's been humiliated because of all the problems that they've caused him and the failure to take the island. Now, he comes up and he orders off the execution right before they were about to do it. And all the Marines were so relieved, everybody's relieved that they didn't get executed. But this is also kind of a publicity stunt by the Emperor of Tokyo, Japan, all that good stuff. And because this would be a violent war crime if you mass murdered all these people, so that's part of the reason why he didn't do it. But all these men, they fought for Wake Island. Most of them gave their lives. One of them earned themselves a Medal of Honor. A pilot earned himself a Medal of Honor after he had to crash land back on the island. So these men were pretty much fearless. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the little history about Wake Island and all that great stuff. So, hope you enjoyed. My name's Brandon, and as always, have a nice day.
Who had never failed to push home attacks against heavy fire. The performance of these pilots is deserving of all praise. They have attacked air and surface targets alike with equal abandon. That none has been shot down is a miracle. Their planes, 2 now remain, are full of bullet holes. 2 forced landings, fortunately without injury to pilots, have occurred with loss of planes. Commander Winfield Scott Cunningham, officer in charge, all naval activities, Wake Island.